Thanks very much. Right, well, welcome all to the first seminar of BP 2013. I've got the pleasure to give this seminar. It's on CIPC, an update on where we are with CIPC, really following the recent review by the Advisory Committee on Pesticides. My name's Mike Storey. I'm chair of the CIPC Stewardship Group, and some of my other colleagues from the Stewardship Group are in the room. Now, does anybody recognize these numbers? Any idea what they are? But that's right. They're between 10 and 20. It's the mgs per kg, and those are the level of exceedances we've had as an industry for CIPC since we started the stewardship program in 2008. Is the sound okay on this for everybody? Yeah, okay. But I think, I ask what number comes next. I think whatever it is, it's got to be less than 10. We can't afford to have any more exceedances of CIPC for the industry. The review that was carried out by ACP in September, we'd had 7 exceedances since January. And really, for the advisory committee, those were 7 exceedances too many. And following the discussion in September, the ACP expressed very serious concerns that MRL exceedances were still occurring within the potato industry. However, they did agree that CIPC approvals could continue, but they put in place some requirements that the industry needs to meet. The first of all was that the approval holders that have approvals for CIPC need to produce additional data to support the label recommendations that have been put in place. They want to have further information and evidence about what factors during storage affect the levels of CIPC residues, and they were picking up on temperature, time of application, the store type, whether it's a box store, bulk store, how the crop's being, how the fog is being applied, ventilation management post-application. They've also asked that the industry step up its monitoring. Already, over the past 5 years of the Stewardship Group, industry has submitted over 3,000 residue results to the ACP. Now, what the ACP want to see is more information surrounding those residue results. For example, information about the crop history and the CIPC treatments, and simply not the data about the residues that are being found. So that's really, so brought us very quickly up to date on the ACP decisions that occurred in September, and it's just been notified to the industry during October and November. And really, how did we get to this position? Well, CIPC, as we're aware, is the most important sprout suppressant that we have. And there's approaching 2 million tonnes treated with CIPC on an annual basis. Most of it is for processing crop, and some goes to fresh markets. And really, there's no suitable alternative for many businesses. And we do have this MRL of 10 mg per kg, which is the threshold that we have. And the ACP are concerned because really potatoes are one of our staple products in the diet. The majority of people are eating potatoes, and we eat a lot of potatoes. So it's one of the chemicals to which consumers are most widely exposed. And that's really where the ACP are concerned about these residues. We know about CIPC. It's applied in box and bulk stores. It's fogged into the stores, and we're looking for an even distribution of that fog through the bulk of the store, whether it's through a bulk stack or through boxes in the store. And we started in 2007 when the first exceedances had been considered by the ACP and put in place a stewardship program. That started in January 2008. It included all the approval holders, representatives of the applicators, red tractor crop assurance so that we could get the best practice messages delivered into the industry, fresh potato suppliers, Potato Processors Association, and we had the involvement of research organisations and advisory bodies such as Sutton Bridge. Over the period since 2008, we've held approaching 20 stewardship group meetings. We've worked across the whole industry to develop best practice, and there's been very close liaison with the regulators to try and protect and retain CIPC for the use of the industry. That action plan was a five-point action plan. It had a strong emphasis on communication with the industry. There was the investment in research and development. A whole new range of controls have been introduced by the industry to minimize the risk that we have MRL exceedances. And as I said, we've already been carrying out monitoring of CIPC for the industry and reporting to the advisory committee. That review was carried out. You've heard the outcomes of that, but we've also, as an industry, made a commitment to ongoing stewardship for the next period, and we have launched the new CIPC Compliant initiative. So in terms of the communication, one of the key messages that we've been making sure that it comes out there is that everybody knows that the maximum rate that can be applied to crop that's destined for processing is 63.75 grams per tonne, and for the fresh market there's a 36 gram per tonne maximum dose. I'm sure many of you have been aware of the stewardship program through the events that the stewardship group have delivered to the industry over the past 5 years, and it's been a key part of the Potato Council's best practice campaign. And as I say, a new website has been launched, and I encourage everybody to look at that new website and get the up-to-date information that's been put on there since the ACP met. Another element of the stewardship program has been the research and development. That has been a significant investment by the industry of some £2.2 million over 5 years. And the elements that we've picked up are identified there, and really we've had good success in bulk stores. Managing the putting ventilators in to make sure that we get even air distribution and uniform application in bulk stores. I think we can cope well with bulk stores and minimize the risk of exceedances occurring in bulk stores, but it's certainly more difficult in box stores. And the message from the box going to the bulk is that we really do need to have positive ventilation in those box stores to get effective distribution of CIPC through all of the boxes. So as well as getting a uniform air distribution and ventilation management, which gives you a uniform temperature in the box and improves the distribution of CIPC, that also has other benefits. So for example, with that better air distribution and temperature control, you're getting a more uniform crop out of the store, and that's showing benefits in terms of fry colour and greater uniformity in fry colour being delivered, for example, into processing. One of the biggest areas where stewardship has impacted has probably been on the numbers of controls that are in place. If you look at the industry 5 years ago and compare it to now, there's a plethora of controls that have been put in place. Code of best practice has been introduced. The operatives who are applying the CIPC now need to be tested and certificated, and the fogging machines have to undergo an annual test so that they're properly calibrated. The individuals who are providing the advice have to be providing advice in terms of basis, so that all applications are recommended by a basis approved advisor. New courses have been developed to allow continuing professional development and upskill the industry in this area. All of these controls and all the best practice recommendations have been built and worked into the crop assurance protocols, and these are updated annually. And about 80% of the industry is red tractor assured and delivering into the fresh and processed market. That says that 20% isn't red tractor, and we've got to make sure that all those guys that are delivering, say, into fish and chips and dealing with farm shops are all operating to the same level, because it only takes one other exceedance and we do have a real challenge from the ACP as to the future of CIPC. One of the key parts of the red tractor assurance has been the introduction of a store checklist, and that has 7 criteria, and this has been stepped up from recommended to becoming critical failure points within the red tractor assurance. And if any reds are identified within the store checklist, CIPC should be being applied to those stores. Now, we've talked about best practice, we've talked about red tractor protocols, but really, how compliant is the industry to all the messages that we're putting out? Well, last season we worked with red tractor, and we did ask some additional questions to got the auditors to ask some additional questions to store managers, just to see if best practice was being adhered to. And if you remember, last year this red store checklist wasn't a critical failure point, but it was one where, under stewardship, it was recommended that the procedures should be followed. So the red tractor survey that we carried out, the questioned 52 producers who between them had 158 on-farm stores and 40 off-farm stores, and CIPC was used in around about 70 to 80% of those stores, because obviously some guys are not using CIPC in those stores, or they're using other alternatives. So 147 stores where CIPC was used, and the question, with the number of questions that we had, are we being CIPC compliant? 4 simple questions we asked. Was that store checklist completed? And was that checklist made available to the application contractor? You can see there about 4 out of 5 people who were red tractor members were following those best practice recommendations. It still means 1 out of 5 aren't following those recommendations. And the other questions that we asked were, did you have the application approved by a basis qualified advisor? And do you know if the fogging contractor was a member of the NAAC scheme? And again, it was about 4 out of 5 people. It wasn't the same 4 out of 5 answering all the questions, so it was a mix. But some of the questions and some of the answers came back was that, no, I didn't check whether the contractor was NAAC registered. It's a contractor I've been using for 15 years. He knew what he was doing. Well, that's not the point. There are people who've been fogging for 15 years who hadn't registered for NAAC. So, there's a real challenge there, and there's got to be a real push across the whole industry to comply with all the best practice recommendations. I mentioned the monitoring that was going on. I mentioned earlier that over 3,000 residue results had been submitted by the industry, and we'd only found one crop that had an MRL of above 10 out of those 3,000. But the industry data has been provided through the stakeholder associations, the potato processors and the fresh potato suppliers, but also the advisory committee look very closely at the pesticide usage surveys that are carried by government and the residue monitoring that is carried out, and it is this monitoring that has thrown up the 7 exceedances. So one opportunity that we've had as a stewardship group is to go and visit a number of those stores where the exceedances occurred. I'll come back to those in a couple of minutes, but this is the picture that the advisory committee were looking at in September with regard to that residue monitoring. You can see that the exceedances, the first one on the left was the one that the very high one that triggered the whole area of concern. That was a residue of 47 mg per kg. We then started stewardship, and for the first 2 years we didn't have any exceedances. And then in the final 3 years of stewardship, we've had exceedances, 3, 1 and 3 exceedances in those years. But the other point is that you can see the blue line going up. Now, to the advisory, to me, that is suggesting perhaps everything that we're doing with CIPC, talking about making sure we're getting the CIPC on, is working. You know, we're getting more CIPC on, we're getting on more effectively, and it's getting to the crop. And what we're seeing is best practice messages being taken up and CIPC in the crop increasing. So perhaps there's the opportunity that we can now start pulling back on the doses of CIPC that we're doing, because what we're putting on, we're getting it on, and we're getting it on more effectively. But to the advisory committee on pesticides, they were saying, you know, stewardship isn't working. You're having the exceedances and the residues are going up. And that's why they're concerned. So two very, very different perspectives on what that data shows. Now, coming on to the stores, those are the stores where the exceedances had occurred, the 18 through to the 15 were the figures I showed earlier on. And you can see that a majority of those exceedances occurred in box stores, and the majority in box stores which were storing crop for the fresh market. Low temperature stores by and large. So in the visits to these stores, you know, there was good grower-applicator relationships. You know, they were perhaps using the same contractor, had been applying CIPC over a number of years. But the grower's responsibility wasn't fully understood. It is the grower who is responsible for their own crop. They can't pass that responsibility over to the application contractor. You know, the other thing that we came up with these audits that is no surprise when we see the red tractor survey, that the sign-off by basis advisors had been inadequate. There was a belief that perhaps someone had been recommending CIPC application when they held a basis certificate, but that basis certificate wasn't up to date. So, you know, there is this requirement to continual check, and it is the grower's responsibility to make sure that this is done. We also found out that information about the stores is still poor. You know, there needs to be better records about store temperatures being maintained in these particular stores. One of the key points that we found when we were doing the audits, that when the CIPC was being applied, there were temperature gradients in the store because fridges hadn't been turned off beforehand, and you had a uneven temperature distribution in the box store. And so when you applied CIPC, you were getting hot spots of CIPC where it was condensing out. Another fact that we came up with was the chain of custody was weak. So the store manager might have known what was applied, but then when it went to a merchant, perhaps a second merchant, and then to a final buyer, that chain of custody about the CIPC treatment wasn't particularly strong. We need to tighten up on that. And as I say, this relates to making sure that this attention is paid to minimizing temperature differentials in stores before CIPC is used. So these are all lessons that we need to take on board if we are going to avoid further exceedances. So coming to this season that we're in now, label changes had been introduced by the approval holders. 3 key areas that we're looking for this season: making sure that there is an early application of CIPC in cold stores, making sure that that application occurs before the temperature drops below 7 degrees C, because CIPC at low temperatures isn't particularly, or distribution at low temperatures isn't particularly effective in stores. And really, we're looking for positive ventilation, and that's recommended in all store types. So those label recommendations are the ones that are being worked on by the industry at the moment, and we'll be following up with further audits through Red Tractor, and I'm sure the CRD will perhaps be stepping up their monitoring of residues to see how well the industry is complying with best practice. Now, I say, just coming to a summary, ACP have agreed for the continuing approval of CIPC. They're still very concerned that we have had the exceedances. The approval holders are going to have to submit additional data over the next couple of years to support those recommendations. And because the UK appears to be having more exceedances than the rest of Europe, they want to do a comparison with management systems between the UK and other European member states. It's not to say that other European member states don't have MRL exceedances. They do, but far fewer are reported to their regulatory authorities. And certainly the industry has to step up its monitoring of residues. For the industry's part, we're making a commitment to ongoing stewardship. We have the new CIPC Compliant campaign, and we have the stewardship stand just opposite here. And for many, we've produced a new store diary that's available to store managers, and that brings together all the best practice recommendations. So if you're storing and you haven't got a store diary, you can pick those up from the stand over the other side. As I say, the approval holders have to submit new statutory data. The research programs are going to be continually, particularly on low temperature stores, and we're going to be stepping up the monitoring. But I'd say the most important thing is we've got to ensure as an industry we are CIPC compliant, and we make that commitment to follow best practice.